Welcome to the Pulling Each Other Along podcast, where we have the most wonderful guests in the world share their journeys of who and what pulled them along to their relative greatnesses in both business and life. Thanks for tuning in. The Pulling Each Other Along podcast starts right now.
Welcome to the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. We are excited to be here. I know this is a little bit of a different format than you're all used to hearing and seeing. I am Jessa Grace. I am new to the team. I'm really excited and honored to be supporting everything. There's so much going on here. And I decided to take over today. And I would really love to have everyone just kind of lean in with me as I'm also learning more about the origin story of Pulling Each Other Along and D3 Day. So I was able to get both of these gentlemen here at the same time. So I want us to all take advantage of the ideas, the insights, the stories, and really the sense of togetherness that we have here, because it's pulling each other along and we're doing it all together for ourselves, for here in this movement, but also for all of you as well, even if it's just to inspire you to get up and pull someone else along. So I want everybody to say hi to Doug and Dave. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
So I want to start this off with the most obvious questions, and then we'll get in a little bit more philosophical and psychological with each other here. So Dave, I want to start with you, because you really, truly are the foundation. You are the biggest inspiration. I've heard a lot about you from Doug, your books, everything else. What would you say is the absolute foundational element for you? Not how did it start, but the element within inside of you. What is that thing that's in you that is the foundation of making all of this happen?
Jessa, that's a great question. And I think when I answer that question, I think it's obvious. I had a physical limitation very early in life. I got polio when I was 10 months old, and was taken from my parents, put in a reconstruction home for a year, and came out using crutches and leg braces. And even though I was not treated differently by my brothers, by the neighborhood kids, when I got to school, I was definitely treated differently and bullied, and made to feel, I don't know what the word meant, just made to feel not normal, that I was different. And so I've always had that feeling in my heart and soul for anyone that I see that has a challenge, be it mental or physical. And I know how they feel. I can read their inner thoughts because I was there. I've been there. I'm still there. You know, there's days when, when somebody gives me a strange look, and it doesn't bother me anymore. But as far as the foundation and the camps go, I realize how really fortunate I was to meet the right people, to have the right teachers, to have the parents I had, to have the brothers I had, all pulling me along the way a little bit at a time. And how fortunate I was to have a dream that really was absurd. It's an absurd dream. And when I look back now, I find it even more absurd from my viewpoint today. But I was very, very fortunate to just get that shot that I needed and to be ready and to parlay that into really what became a lifelong career in the game of baseball that I love. So that never left me, that feeling of, and I try to get that across to players in the clubhouse today. Guys, this is a privilege to be here. You may take it for granted that I'm coming here every day and I'm doing this every day. Don't take it for granted, because it could end quickly, and it is a privilege to be where you're at. The people you're going to meet today in our camps may never have the privilege of being in here. And I know we probably don't have the time to tell this story, or maybe we will a little bit later, but there was a girl in a wheelchair that really put it to me straight, because I was one of those guys. Believe it or not, even with my crutches and a left leg brace, I was playing the game. I was living my dream. And I too took it for granted until a little girl in a wheelchair in Eau Claire, Wisconsin set me straight. And I never forgot that. Never.
I heard that story
And
twice, and I cried twice.
well, we don't need to tell it a third time then, but
Everybody pay attention, coming podcasts. I'm going to be pulling all of these stories out for everyone. But that is a a good one.
well,
It's a-
that you asked the question, and that's where it all began. But I've never forgot my roots. I've never forgot that I too have severe limitations and overcame them.
Mhm.
And you may not be able to overcome your limitations, but you can do something. You do have potential. And we need to find out what your potential is by going out and trying different things. And that's where the basis of these camps all began.
I love that. What I'm hearing is that you have an like a almost like distilled all of your experiences down to empathy and resilience. And
Yeah.
those are two things that you kind of have to have together, or you're going to get swallowed alive, regardless of where you are in your life. And that is honorable, because myself personally, anybody who knows my story, I have a ton of that as well. And I teach that to my children. And it's empowering, but it is not easy. It is not easy. And for you to have from the day you were born practically all the way through to now, held on to those two things, which are the heaviest tools in a toolkit, that's very admirable. Very,
Well,
very.
thank you. I appreciate that. You hit the nail on the head, though. It's resilience, because it hasn't been a smooth ride. And I've been knocked down several times, more than I probably even imagined and
Yeah.
can count. But you got to get back up. And that's what I tell the parents of these kids that come to our camps. It's okay to get a bruised elbow, get a
Yeah.
cut on your chin. That's
Yeah.
life. That's life. Get up and get going.
Yeah.
And too many times we reel that leash in very tight when we have someone with a physical or mental challenge. No, you can't do that. No, and all of a sudden that becomes ingrained in their head. They can't do it. Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. There's no word can't until you try it and find out if you can.
Don't decide.
Then you can answer that question.
I like that. Oh, and that brings up another question that wasn't on my list, but I'm going to ask it. What would you say is the difference in how it affects your decision making anyways? The difference between physical resilience and mental or emotional resilience?
The difference between them, I can tell you this from personal experience. At least this is just my opinion. A physical limitation, I would much rather, if you had to have one of the two, I'd much rather have the physical limitation, because you can find a way to accomplish what you want to accomplish, maybe doing it differently than the so-called norm, but you can still find a way. On the other hand, dealing with mental challenges is very, very difficult, because physically we can still move forward. Mentally, it sometimes is very, very difficult to cross over. And I know that from personal experience with our own daughter. And I'll tell you what, she has looked at me 2 or 3 different times in the 11 years that we have been dealing with her situation, and said to me, "Dad, I would much rather have your challenge than mine." And I can't disagree with that. I've seen what she's gone through. I know what I've gone through. And she's got the tougher challenge.
Wow, that is very true and very, I'm gonna sit with that. I'm gonna journal about that one later for sure. Thank you for that vulnerable share. I really appreciate that. Oh my goodness. Now I want to switch. Doug, I would love to hear your origin story with Dave. How did you meet? Why did you connect? Why did you personally connect? Not why did you two connect? What was that zinger or that element for you that made you say, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to attach myself and I'm going to help and I'm going to serve, because you are such a slave to this. You are going all day, every doing, going, being, calling, traveling. I mean, you've been to how many states in the last like 3 weeks, really supporting this. What is your origin story here?
So first off, I always have to apologize to Dave for meeting him and forcing this upon him, I guess. I don't know. Our origin story, whether it sounds crazy enough, is I can literally see us maybe 100 years ago playing baseball together in two different bodies, on the same bench and giving each other a fist pump, handshake, high five, whatever they did back 100 years ago. And for whatever reason, the winds blew us together again in this life. And I don't understand it in some ways. I have a son that was born with neither arm developed. And when I learned about Dave Clark, my son Gideon wasn't even walking yet. And I'm reading an article when we were transitioning my family of 5 children at that time from Atlanta, Georgia area to Corning, New York. So huge town, lots of traffic, to small town, no traffic. And in that transition, I was flying back and forth, working with my brothers. I'd partnered with them at the Merrill Lynch office in Corning, and going back and forth before I could transition my family. That was about 5 or 6 weeks of transition. And I was studying down in Georgia, but I was taking breaks reading the newspaper that I'd still read. This is how old it is. 20 some years ago, we actually had the newspaper and no cell phones to to swipe through and all those things. Yeah. And I see this guy pitching on crutches and an article about him when he had won the Heroes of Sports Award at the World Congress Center. Big award, $17,000 check, 15,000 of that at least went to disability sports camps that Dave was already doing. I think that went to the YMCA here in Corning at the time.
Did.
And I'm reading this article. I grew up in the sports world. My father was a world-class athlete. I was around big sports legends as a kid. I met Jesse Owens, O.J. Simpson, all those guys. They might have been just literally in the same room that I was. And I really didn't even almost think much of it, except for meeting Jesse Owens. And so I just kind of grew up with that. And here I'm reading this article about a man who played professional baseball on his crutches. I'm like, you'd think I would know this, even though it was the minor league level. You'd think I would know who this is. And so, as most athletes that made it to a decent level, we want to know what's the catch. But the bigger catch was, in reading this article, is that Dave was living in and from Corning, New York. Yeah. And we were moving my family to Corning, New York. So how does this happen? How does this, reading this article, I'm transitioning my family to the north, which I said I'd never do again. And as it would be, as the winds blew us together, Dave had just finished his 10-year career of championship baseball 3 years in a row at the Swedish major league level as a coach. And he had moved back to his home here in Corning more full time with just one child at the time and his wife. And so I found out, I asked my brother Kurt in our office, who's this Dave Clark guy. Long story short, he said, hey, I know Dave. And I'm like, Dave? Why don't I know Dave? It seems like I should know Dave. I should know this guy. And as it would be, I walked up behind the dugout when Dave was coaching part-time as a pitching coach for our local pro team at the time in Elmira, New York. And we kind of pieced this together, because our brains don't capture everything. But I think I'd Gideon in my arms. I looked around the dugout. I asked Dave if he would meet with me after the game. I think he gave me let's give me a few minutes. He had press conferences and all that kind of stuff to talk about afterward. And then I waited with my son Gideon in my arms, and he came up to me this little guy at 5'2" on his crutches, in his baseball gear. And I had Gideon in my arms. So now I see that look in Dave's face all the time. When he sees somebody like Gideon, there's something that goes off in his soul and spirit being, literally being. And we talked for a bit, and I just said, hey, I'd love to meet with you. I'd love to just get to know you or whatever. And we wound up changing cell phones. I don't know if it was a week, 2, 3, I don't really remember, but we wound up going to breakfast at our local Market Street here in Corning at a little Italian restaurant, Sorge's, and we chatted. And the only thing that I can remember about that event, really remember, is at the end of it, Dave looked at me and said, nobody's ever asked me questions like you're asking.
Wow.
And I understand that because before this, I'd actually traveled with an actor in a film. He was actually an actor in a film about Jesus, and he was Jesus. And I traveled with this guy. And so he'd get the same questions over and over and over again. And it gets pretty tiring, to answer those same questions over and over again. But with me and Dave, it was different because here I'm asking him questions. What did your parents do? How did they deal with this in school? I don't remember exactly the questions, but I know they were centric to me as a father of a special needs child, asking somebody that grew up as the special needs child, wanting to know what his parents did.
Because it's a great example. He excelled. And of course,
Right.
that's what child.
Well, it didn't make sense to me, to be honest. None of this made sense. I mean, at this point, Dave was, I think, either in a scooter or it was getting harder for him to get around on his crutches. And I'm like, none of this makes sense. Sure, you played professional baseball. Yeah. Come on. What's the catch here? That's literally what I'm thinking. And I deal with those as I tell that to people now. Of course, I know how to overcome that objection a little bit more so. But when I'm talking with the AA, AAA, major league level, they don't want to think that a guy like Dave made it to the same level that they did.
See.
So they don't want to, no. You didn't play at my level. That's literally almost what they're thinking.
I struggled to get here. How did you get here?
That's correct. And they don't believe it. I learned I had to dumb his story down in telling it to people in the beginning so that people would listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just pure and simple. So anyway, that meeting, that breakfast, I don't know, we stayed in contact, and the light bulbs went off to me as the Corning whistles are going off, Dave.
5 o'clock.
Yes, yeah.
It is.
So this is a very blue collar town.
Yes, it is.
So, and Dave grew up here. I didn't grow up here, but I just knew he would appreciate the Corning whistles going off. Sorry, podcast people, for interrupting our origin story, but Corning is a big part of this origin story.
Huge.
And and it's just we clicked. We stayed connected. Certainly, I didn't know I'd be traveling all over the country with this man, speaking events, doing sports camps, doing podcasts together, writing books about him, all those kind of things. But I did have this light bulb go off on me, and I'll finish up with this long-winded story. I was actually on my cell phone at the time, driving back and forth to Merrill Lynch. I'd called Dave, not even sure if he was a client of mine yet at this point. And the whole baseball thing didn't make sense. I mean, again, I was a scholarship athlete. I was around athletes, what I would have thought of as real athletes at the time, not somebody hobbling around in crutches, and that's just, I'm only saying this not in jest, but that's the way your mind thinks. And I said, okay, Dave, what were your pitches? And he's very hard to get information out of. He said, well, I had a slurve, I had a curveball, what is your fastball? Well, I can only top out at about 79 miles an hour, which is still fast, but that isn't getting you to, minor league baseball. And I said, and then he says, well, I was a knuckleballer. And I go, oh, okay. There's like light bulbs going off in my brain. He threw the knuckleball. And if for those that don't know what a knuckleball is, it's a very different pitch, but it's just proof of somebody like Dave, where when you have to figure out something differently, you reach into that different bag, you pull it out, you practice desperation pitch, as he calls it. You don't throw it fast usually, although there's some people that have broken that mold. You throw it with either the tips of your fingers or your knuckles, hence it's called a knuckleball, but you let it go in a way where it barely spins. And because it barely spins, it literally catches the air and the wind and it moves randomly.
Like a butterfly.
Like a butterfly. And so with that, Dave was pitching the butterfly pitch, or more referred as the knuckleball. But as soon as he said that he had mastered or pitched the knuckleball, then I was like, okay, this starts to make sense. And I'm literally at the end of that conversation. I am on my porch at this point where we were living at the time. And I'm thinking, if this isn't a movie deal, nothing is. And those thoughts sparked that much in me, my entrepreneurial blood, even though I was working for a company at the time, those entrepreneurial, this is, somebody's got to be interested in this story. They just have to be. And of course, that's not an easy road and all those kind of things, but that connects the dots for me. And then literally about 9 years later, David become a client. I'd gotten to know his father, actually. His father had become a client. His brother had become a client. And I got really involved with some of the financial things that happened in Dave's life and his father's life. But more importantly, we talked 90% baseball or sports, in our conversations, and disabilities and Gideon and my, family, all those things. And when a major thing happened at Merrill Lynch, Bank of America merged, I found myself not being able to really work with my full heart. And I think just as we've gotten to know each other, I got to have my full heart in it. And I wound up leaving Merrill Lynch. And I told Dave, I want to do something with your story. I don't know what it is. I want to do something. And about a year later, we officially shook hands after his first speaking event, when he shared the pulling each other along story. And hardly anybody, there was nobody that wasn't in tears listening to this man speaking with his notes in his hands at the time, very unpolished. It was a big
Still
convention,
unpolished.
big convention at the time. And of course, a full-blown standing ovation as soon as he was done. And at that moment, even though I was working on another project at the time, at that moment, I'm like, okay, we have to do something with this. So hence, we shook hands. We became business partners. I'm sorry, but we did.
I'm going to have to make the same apology. We're probably doing a repeat with me of the same thing. The first time I read the book, I couldn't even finish it. So I had to okay, let's start this again. And now we still read the book. I have 3 young children. I cannot read the last quarter of the book. I have to hand it over to one of the boys because I can't. It's and I know it verbatim.
Yeah. And technically we haven't told the story of the pulling each other along story on this podcast yet. So
Oh, really? Okay.
no, on this particular, on this origin story.
Make a series then, because that's going to be amazing. Yes.
Speaking of the pulling each other along story, I was at the game the other night over here at Hammond Stadium, and Brian Meyer's wife came up and introduced
Coach's wife of the team.
Right, the coach's wife introduced herself and told me, and they have a 4-year-old named Walker. And Walker came over. He's hiding behind his mom's leg, and he came over, and she let me know that somehow they have a I can't remember what they called it, and but they have a audio thing that can play him books at night when his dad is on the road, so he can hear his dad's voice reading him this, and our book is the top book. The Pulling Each Other Along, A Pound of Kindness is the top book. And so Brian actually read that book cover to cover, and they put it on this tape, whatever it was. And so when Brian's out of town, Mom will play the Pound of Kindness for Walker.
A great idea. Oh, you guys, I promised myself I was not going to cry. The one day working with you guys, very emotional journey. Okay. So those were great answers for both of you. I have a little deeper question now, because this is personal for me too. This is an introspective point for me in my own life, in my own journey, because I have also come against my own walls and my own failures and my own pivots and everything in my life. And one thing for myself personally that I had to really dig deep into was allowing someone to pull me along. So whoever wants to go first, the question here is, how easy is it for you to allow someone to pull you along? I know both of you are fantastic at doing the pulling, but would you say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being please come, give, do,
Can I
one
answer this first for Dave?
I know where you're going with this.
Dave's like 0.02. And I wondered about that, Dave, because I know you know that Ernie Pound, and we really haven't talked about this, but I know Dave is not one to necessarily just jump in a wagon and let somebody pull him along. Let me tell you. And I have example after example after example of this.
Okay.
But I wonder, and I don't think we've ever really dug into this, but was it hard? Do you remember it being hard to get into the wagon?
No, I to be honest with you, I'm like Ernie. I don't remember a lot about it. All I remember is that it really turned the day around completely for me, from being a dreaded day to an enjoyable day of inclusion, of feeling like I was part of the class finally. And I think that made it easier. I think it was, and I'm just speculating here, but it probably was, I probably shied away from getting into that thing right away. And Ernie probably coaxed me into it. And I'm surmising here, because I know myself. Even today, it's very difficult for me to realize and be truthful, even with myself, that it's getting much harder for me to do things. I can't get around on my crutches the way I used to. So I use the scooter more and more. That's not easy for me to deal with, and it's never been easy for me to ask for help. Never. Because I wanted to prove that I could do it. So there's somewhat of the answer as to why you don't want to be pulled along, because you want to prove I can do this. I'm okay. I don't need any help.
Nobody wants to be vulnerable.
No, they don't. But on the other hand, Doug will disagree with this probably, but I think I'm more acceptable to accepting help today than I've ever been, in certain areas. Now, I mean, Doug, some things are comical. Doug's been privy to some of these things where someone will walk up and they'll go, "Oh, you drive?" I go, "Yeah, I drive." "Oh, that is just wonderful that you drive." And I'm sitting there thinking, what's the big deal? I'm driving. You don't know, you know, you don't even know me. But that's the perception, I think, sometimes that we give, and another perception, which I really don't like, of people with challenges, mental and physical, is sometimes I've seen people assume that because someone has a mental challenge, they're not smart. Totally untrue. Totally untrue. Read the book. Don't look at the cover.
Yep.
And open the book up and find out what they can do. And this really bothers me. I've been, and not very often, but a couple of times, been in a restaurant where my wife and I and our family have sat down, and the waitress will come up and she'll look at my wife and she'll go, "And what is he having?" Pointing to me, like I can't speak for myself because I am physically challenged.
Whoa.
And at that point, and Doug probably knows what happens, At that point, I'll go, ma'am, I can speak for myself. And they're like, oh. And, it just astonishes me what we assume
Yeah.
because of someone's looks.
Yeah. That is.
You could go to cerebral palsy. Someone with cerebral palsy and they have all these spastic moves. People assume they can't think for themselves. Totally. One of the smartest fellas I've ever met in my life was named Zeke. He was in Corning when I was growing up, and Zeke had cerebral palsy, and his movements were all over the place. Smartest man I ever met. And some of those experiences have readied me for what we do today. Just living those experiences and knowing that people don't open the book. They just look at the cover and they don't open the book. You need to open the book, man. Open the book and read it. Find out what that person can do.
Yeah. Wow. That is very smart. Open the book. So that leads me to my next question then. You're so good at teeing these up for me. Let's imagine there is a child coming to a D3 day. They're on the field and they are in a position to be pulled along a little bit and they say no. Now that you're in a position where you have learned later in life to accept help, to actually receive, what would you say to that child so that they don't take the rest of their life to learn to receive?
I personally have a fresh example, but
I know who you're going with. Go ahead, Doug.
well,
But I also want to point out an example of the camp this last Saturday.
no, I have a fresh example, but it's an example that I learned from a past camp. We have a young man. He's a young man now, but when he was a little boy, he's deaf and Down syndrome. And Dave was actually there, so you could tell this portion of the story if you want. But he didn't want to do anything. Deaf and Down syndrome, little boy, seeing all these people around. And the players on the field, these young minor league players, wound up getting a young player named Ben. Oh, Ben will know what to do. Ben knows what to do for whatever reason.
They did.
Ben,
Let's back it up a little, because the players, even though we addressed them before the camp, and I tell them straight out, I said, guys, first 10 minutes is going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward. You're going to be dealing with situations and people that you're not normally dealing with. It's going to be awkward. Think outside the box. Try to do things that will make them successful in whatever station you're at. Figure it out. Let them do it. So the players in that particular situation were baffled until we asked them, and you can take it from here, Doug. We asked them who might be able, because we don't know the players either. I mean, we don't know those players. We met them half hour before. So we went up and asked who could bring this little guy out.
Keep
who
going,
could
Dave.
get him doing.
Keep going.
And that guy, and by the way, you don't know this, Doug, Ben is a coach down here now. I'm going to be meeting with him.
That's great.
So Ben Revere is the guy they all pointed to. I said, Ben, come over here. So Ben, come over. And in the meantime, Down syndrome boy, 6, 7 years old, he's like this. Then he is not going to do anything. He does not want to be here. So he's sitting down with his legs crossed on the ground and like this. So Ben goes about 20 feet opposite him and sits down the same way. And he started rolling a ball, just rolling a ball to him. It would go like this. And he did it for 6 times. Ben did. And 6 times the kid just looked at it. The 7th time, kid reached down and grabbed it. threw it back to Ben. Long story short, little boy's been coming for 17 years now. And Ben made it to the major leagues, never forgot the little guy. Has invited him and his entire family to several games at the major league level. And his dad, this little boy's name Billy, his dad's Bill. I talked with Bill yesterday, and Ben is coaching with the Atlanta Braves up at Cool Today Park. They just had dinner with him, and I'm going to be getting in touch with Ben.
And this family was at their wedding.
I was at their wedding.
Billy
Yep.
has every jersey with Revere on it of every major league team.
If you really want a heart-touching story,
the hug.
We went to a spring. Billy just admires Ben. And Ben was playing with the Philadelphia Phillies at the time, and they came here in Fort Myers to play the Twins during spring training one year. And Billy made plans to meet with Ben. Well, the coach would not let Ben come out of the clubhouse to see Billy. So as the Phillies were leaving the stadium in their buses, Billy and I witnessed this.
So did
I stood back, but Billy and his dad were up on the curb. They were going to wave to Ben as the bus went by. And I won't mention the manager's name of the Phillies at the time, but he had specifically forbidden any of the players to get off that bus once they start moving. So there were two buses. One came by, the next one came by, and Billy's waving with his dad. The bus stopped, and Ben ran down the steps of the bus, got out, gave Billy a huge hug, and got back on the bus. Now Ben got a hell of a lot of trouble for that.
But that's sadly, but he did.
But that's what just, we have a lot of stories like that, but that's one of them that tugs at the heart a little bit.
I knew there was going to be a story answer to that question. That is.
So I'm going to cap that story one more time, because just this past weekend at our May 6th camp at the same field, I don't do I'm directing these camps. My head's in, where's the food? Where's everybody going? Is there, where do we need more volunteers? Where are the players? My head is very different than some of the volunteers where they're just playing with the kids. But every once in a while I'm looking around and I see something, and this happens more than once, but I saw a mom struggling with her, I would say 4 or 5-year-old son. He wasn't wanting to do anything. He was pulling against her. She was getting frustrated. You could see that frustrated mom look. Oh, I want him to do this stuff, but he won't. And I put my Ben Revere hat on, and I literally sat down with him and I rolled him a ball, and he rolled it back. We did that only for about a minute, and whatever clicked in his mind, he popped up, and then all of a sudden he was a part of the camp, and he just went on his way. And it was like all of a sudden this mom went from tug of war with her son to just getting him to do that little activity of just me rolling the ball back and forth with him. And then all of a sudden he's in our videos, he's wandering around, he's got smiles on his face, he's hitting balls, the whole bit. And again, that's a memory of just get him to do something little that I learned from a minor league player, of doing these camps. And Dave and I could go on and on and on with these stories, trust me.
Yeah. Wow. So moved, so tickled. And I don't want this to go on forever and ever and ever for everyone. So I would really love to close with number one. Anybody can answer this. What is the number one thing that someone can do for this movement right now that would actually be like rolling us a ball so that we can roll them to the other kids?
Well, Doug, we need to be pulled along. I'm going to let you take this one, and I'll set it up for you. We do not charge a dime for these camps. We don't charge anything to the parents, the caregivers, the participants. And so all the expenses are raised mainly through efforts by Doug. And so I'm going to throw it over to Doug, but just keep in mind that these camps are entirely free all over the country.
Right. And I like to say they're free for the families. They're not free for us. There's a lot of expense, a lot of time, a lot of effort from not just me, from volunteers, from the players, from Dave, from the other Dave. We should do Origins 2 with Dave Stevens as far as a podcast. Okay. But you're asking a specific question. There's little things that people can do. They can tag us. They can go to our podcast. They can subscribe. They can put a comment in. They can buy our books. They can go to pullingeachotheralong.com, buy our books. Of course, I'm the writer of 2 of them, so I can say they're super great and pat myself on the back. And I do believe they're super great. So, they're great stories, but I had a great somebody to write them about. And of course, the Pulling Each Other Along book is 30 more stories like our original wagon story. And, but right now, let me transition to our main goal. Our main goal is we're bringing in a team of people to help pull us along. But in return, with the help of you, Jessa, Dave, our other Dave, and a team of people, we're actually helping each other pull each other along. And so we're specifically looking for business people that have a heartfelt ministry mindset, of wanting to do good with their marketing dollars. This isn't a donation that we're looking for. We actually have a very strong offer that we're offering people to be right now founders of our Pulling Each Other Along collective. And we have an easy way to get in. We have a little harder way to get in, but we're not just asking for your money to be sponsors of all these camps and activities that we do, although you are. We are asking you to become a part of us so that we can help you help us. And that's what we're doing with this Pulling Each Other Along collective. And so if you're a business person who wants to help people and help people be included, help people in disabilities and diversity and all those things that are so important today, but don't know how to do it, or we just want to do more of it, then go to our Pulling Each Other Along. It's actually PEOC Collective. It's on Jessa's page right there. You can also go to pullingeachotheralong.com. You can send us a note through our contact page, and we'll contact you. We'll set up a meeting. And we'll meet with you and we'll explain what this program is. A very inexpensive program to a little more expensive to, if you want to be a full-blown camp supporter, then we need a little more dollars for that. But we have different levels for just about any business person to attain to. But keep in mind, yes, you're pulling us along, but we're also our goal is to pull you along as well.
I love that. And I will say, for those listening, it was this collective idea that made me stand up, lean forward, and raise my hand and say, I'm part of this. I'm doing this. I'm definitely going to be a member of the collective, but I want to be a part of it. And that's why I'm here today doing this. It moved my heart. It moved every part of me that I know needs to be nurtured, whether it's my emotional or my psychological or my business self. All of it just jumped in with a huge yes. And I'm really excited to share with all of you the details of it and how it actually works. There's way too many moving parts to explain on a podcast, but in the comments, in the description of this podcast, there will be details to contact us. Get on the phone with me personally, or Doug personally, anybody, whoever you want to speak to. We are here and we're happy to pull you along and say thank you at the same time, which is something that we've all learned here today. It's important to say, yes, you can pull me along, and how can I help at the same time? Any closing thoughts? What is one thing that we would love to share with everyone for the 2023 season of D3 Day?
Finish it up, Dave.
I think I'll leave it with this. I usually say this in the clubhouse, but it doesn't matter whether you have a physical, mental challenge, whoever you are. If you think you can, you got a shot. If you don't think you can, you got no shot. So always give it everything you've got, because there's no dream that's ever impossible.
There are the dreamers that dream and what?
And do.
That dream and do.
Dream and do.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jessa.
You're a great host, by the way. Way better than the other host.
Oh yeah, much better looking.
Much better looking than all the other hosts.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for being the host today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. If you were inspired today, please share this episode and let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to thank and let those great people in your life know how they pulled you